"Ma'am, you need to leave that seat. Now!" The flight attendant's voice cut through the air like a sharp blade, drawing the attention of half the plane. Margaret Thompson, 72, looked up slowly. Her arthritic hands clutched the first-class ticket she had bought with her own savings to visit her grandson's medical school graduation. "I'm sorry, but this is my seat. Seat 2A. "I don't care what your ticket says," retorted Jessica Palmer, the head flight attendant, with a cruel smile that didn't reach her eyes. "A very important passenger needs this seat. You're going to sit in the back of the plane, where you should have been from the start." An uncomfortable silence filled the cabin. Other passengers looked away, pretending not to notice what was obvious: an elderly black woman being publicly humiliated by a 30-year-old white flight attendant who clearly believed she held all the power in the world. Margaret had worked for 45 years as head nurse at Chicago General Hospital. She had saved hundreds of lives, trained dozens of doctors, and survived the racism of the 1970s when she was one of the few black nurses in leadership positions. She never imagined that at 72, she would be treated like a second-class citizen on a flight she had paid for herself. "Young lady," Margaret said with disturbing calm, "I can see your badge says Jessica Palmer. I want you to understand something. I bought this ticket. I paid for this seat, and I'm not moving." Jessica snorted, her arrogance growing with every word. "Don't you understand? Or do I need to call security to explain how things work around here?" She made sure to speak loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Some people are born for first class. Others need to learn their place." That's when Margaret did something unexpected. Instead of standing up indignantly or starting an argument, she simply smiled. A serene, almost maternal smile, as if she were looking at a rude child who didn't understand the magnitude of the mistake she had just made. "Are you absolutely sure you want to do this?" Margaret asked, her voice low but laden with an authority that made Jessica hesitate for a second. "Don't threaten me, Grandma," Jessica replied, regaining her arrogance. "You're going to get out of that seat, or you're getting off this plane. Your choice." What Jessica Palmer didn't know was that Margaret Thompson wasn't just a retired nurse. Over the past 5 decades, she had saved the lives of more than 200 pilots during medical emergencies on flights. Her name was on a very special list, known only to the most experienced commercial airline pilots, and the captain of a particular flight owed a 30-year debt to the woman Jessica had just humiliated. Margaret discreetly took out her phone and typed a quick message. Her hands didn't shake. Her eyes showed no anger, only the infinite patience of someone who knew exactly what was about to happen. "All right, honey," Margaret said, slowly getting to her feet. "If that's how you want it." At that moment, Jessica Palmer felt victorious. She had no idea that she had just made the biggest mistake of her career, and that in exactly 9 minutes, her professional life would collapse in such a spectacular fashion that it would become aviation legend. As Margaret slowly rose from seat 2A, Jessica Palmer crossed her arms with a satisfied smile. "Finally, I thought I was going to have to call security." She made sure to speak loudly, ensuring that everyone in first class heard her victory. Margaret walked down the narrow aisle with the dignity of a dethroned queen, carrying her small handbag and the ticket that proved her right to that seat. Each painful step on her arthritic legs was an additional humiliation that Jessica seemed to relish. "Seat 34F, Jessica announced, pointing to the back of the plane, right next to the bathroom. Perfect for someone your age. What Jessica didn't notice was a passenger in seat 1B watching the whole scene with growing attention. Captain Marcus Williams was traveling as a passenger that day, returning from an aviation safety conference in Miami. When he heard the name Margaret Thompson spoken with disdain, his eyes widened. It couldn't be the same Margaret Thompson. Marcus discreetly took out his phone and opened the airline's database. He typed in the name with trembling fingers. Margaret Thompson, 72, Chicago. The photo that appeared on the screen confirmed his suspicions and made his heart race. It was her, the nurse who had saved his life in 1993. Meanwhile, Margaret settled into her cramped seat in the back, between a teenager with headphones and a woman who was clearly annoyed at having an intruder next to her. The irony was not lost on her. The woman who had saved more lives on airplanes than any flight attendant was being treated like unwanted luggage. Jessica, feeling invincible after her show of power, decided to push further. She approached Margaret again, this time with a tray of expensive first-class beverages. "Oh, I forgot to mention," Jessica said, her voice dripping with venom. "The drinks back here aren't free, unlike first class where everything is included. But I'm sure you understand how class differences work." Margaret just nodded politely. "Sure, honey. Water is fine for me." "Tap water, then," Jessica replied with a cruel smile. "Bottled water costs extra." It was at that moment that Captain Marcus Williams rose from seat 1B. His steady footsteps down the aisle drew attention. But Jessica was too busy humiliating Margaret to notice the storm brewing. Marcus stopped beside Jessica, his imposing presence causing her to turn around. "Excuse me, I need to speak with this passenger." Jessica frowned. "Excuse me, but who are you?" "This is my section." "Captain Marcus Williams, 25 years of service in commercial aviation," he replied, showing her his ID. "And this lady," he said, pointing to Margaret, "saved my life 30 years ago." Jessica's arrogant smile began to falter. I don't understand." "Of course you don't," Margaret said calmly, looking at Marcus with a genuine smile for the first time since she boarded. "Marcus Williams, Flight 447 to Denver, 1993. You had a severe allergic reaction at 35,000 feet. Marcus nodded, moved. "She improvised an emergency medical kit with materials from the plane and kept my airways open for 45 minutes until we could make an emergency landing. The doctor said that without her intervention, I would have died before we touched the ground." Jessica swallowed hard, finally realizing that she had completely underestimated the woman she had just humiliated. But her arrogance got the better of her. "Well, that was a long time ago. Today, she's just another passenger, and I have authority here." Margaret picked up her phone again and showed the screen to Marcus. "Remember Dr. Richardson from Flight 892 in 2001? And Flight Attendant Sarah Chun, who had seizures on that flight in 2008. They're all on my contact list." Marcus smiled, understanding exactly what Margaret was showing him. Her phone contacts were a veritable aviation hall of fame. Pilots, flight attendants, and passengers who owed their lives to her medical skills developed over decades of flying to family emergencies. "Jessica," Marcus said, his voice taking on an authoritative tone that made the flight attendant cringe, "I suggest you check with the captain of this flight to find out what the protocol is for treating honorary members of the Air Rescue Association." "Association? What?" Jessica stammered. Margaret finally allowed a mischievous smile to appear on her face. "It's a very exclusive list, dear. Only people who have saved lives during air emergencies are included, and our names are in a special database that every experienced captain knows about." Marcus nodded to Margaret. "With your permission, I'm going to have a chat with the captain of this flight. I'm sure he'll be interested to know how one of our heroes is being treated." As Marcus walked determinedly toward the cockpit, Jessica felt for the first time that she might have made a mistake, but her arrogance still prevented her from recognizing the magnitude of the disaster she had created. Margaret watched Jessica walk away hurriedly, clearly nervous. Then, with the patience of someone who had faced decades of prejudice and emerged victorious, she typed another message. This time it was to a WhatsApp group called Angels of the Air, a network of 47 commercial pilots who owed their lives to her. The message was simple: "I need you, family." Within minutes, her phone began to vibrate with replies, and they all contained the same promise: "On my way." Jessica Palmer had no idea that she had just awakened a network of loyalty forged in moments of life and death. In a few minutes, she would discover that some battles you just can't win, especially when you're fighting someone who has proven that angels really do exist, and they fly planes. 3 minutes after Marcus Williams entered the cockpit, the plane's intercom crackled with an authority that made all passengers stop talking instantly. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Robert Chun. Please remain in your seats for a special announcement." Jessica Palmer felt a chill run down her spine. In her 8-year career, she had never witnessed a special announcement during boarding. Something was wrong, and a growing sense of panic began to form in her stomach. "Today, Our airline is honored to have a very special passenger on board. Margaret Thompson, a retired nurse from Chicago, is an honorary lifetime member of the International Air Rescue Association. Jessica's blood ran cold. Association of what? During her 45-year career, Mrs. Thompson personally saved the lives of 237 people during medical emergencies on commercial flights, continued the captain, his voice echoing throughout the cabin, including 47 pilots who are flying today thanks to her medical expertise. Margaret remained seated quietly at the back of the plane, but her phone wouldn't stop vibrating. Message after message arrived in the angels of the air group. We're on our way to the airport, mobilizing the private fleet. No one treats our hero like this. Jessica tried to hide behind a drink cart, but it was too late. Other passengers began to turn and look at her, whispering among themselves. Some were already recording with their cell phones. Unfortunately, the captain's voice took on an icy tone. We have been informed that this passenger was treated in an absolutely unacceptable manner by a member of our crew. It was then that Jessica Palmer realized the magnitude of her mistake. Her legs trembled as she tried to process what was happening. The woman she had humiliated was not just some old lady. She was a living aviation legend. Marcus Williams emerged from the cockpit, carrying an official airline briefcase. His steady footsteps down the aisle created a deathly silence. When he stopped in front of Jessica, his expression was one of devastating professional coldness. "Jessica Palmer, employee number 4471, he said, consulting his papers. By direct order of Captain Chun and the operations board, you are immediately suspended from your duties." I don't understand, Jessica stammered. Her previous arrogance completely evaporated. It was just a seat reassignment. It was racial discrimination against a national hero, Marcus replied loud enough for the entire first class to hear. And it's being recorded by at least a dozen passengers who have already posted the videos on social media. Margaret's phone vibrated again. This time it was a call from Amanda Chun, the airline's public relations director and the captain's daughter. "Margaret, on behalf of the entire commercial aviation industry, I apologize profusely. We are already preparing a public response. This employee will be terminated immediately." Margaret deliberately answered on speakerphone. "Amanda, dear, don't worry. These things happen when people don't know who they're dealing with." Jessica heard every word and felt her legs buckle. The realization that she had publicly humiliated someone with direct connections to the company's top management made her world collapse in a matter of seconds. Furthermore, Marcus continued, pulling another document from the folder, "We just received a call from Captain Michael Rodriguez, Director of Operations for the West Coast. He was on the flight where Ms. Thompson saved his life in 2003. He wants to speak to you personally." Marcus activated the speakerphone. The voice that emerged was as sharp as ice. "Jessica Palmer, you humiliated the woman who gave me 22 more years with my family. Your resignation has been processed. Your flight attendant license will be reviewed by the Federal Aviation Administration, and you can be sure that no reputable airline will hire you after we're done publicizing this incident." The entire cabin was now focused on the drama unfolding. Passengers murmured among themselves, clearly shocked by the turn of events. Some applauded discreetly. Margaret finally rose from seat 34F. There was no hurry in her movements, just the quiet dignity of someone who has always known that the truth will eventually come out. She walked slowly down the aisle toward Jessica, who was now visibly shaking. "Honey," Margaret said softly, stopping in front of Jessica, "in 72 years of life, I've learned that you can judge a person by how they treat those who can't return the favor." Jessica lowered her eyes, unable to hold Margaret's steady but kind gaze. Tears of humiliation and regret began to stream down her face. "You treated me badly because you thought I was just another unimportant old black woman," Margaret continued, her voice remaining calm and maternal. "But it wasn't about me. It was about who you chose to be. And that choice has consequences." Captain Chin personally emerged from the cockpit, something Jessica had never witnessed in her career. He walked directly to Margaret and, in front of all the passengers, bowed respectfully. "Mrs. Thompson, on behalf of the entire crew in this airline, I offer you my sincerest apologies. Your seat in first class is being prepared, and your flight today is complimentary. Jessica watched in total shock as Margaret was escorted back to first class like a true VIP. The contrast with the treatment she herself had given the lady just hours earlier was devastatingly clear to everyone present. Her personal phone began to ring incessantly. Messages poured into her WhatsApp groups. "Jessica, you're a national meme. Your career is over, girl." Everyone is talking about the racist flight attendant video. Marcus approached her once more, but now his expression had softened slightly. "Jessica, you're still young. You can learn from this, but first you need to face the consequences." When the plane finally took off, Margaret was comfortably seated in seat 1A, receiving the VIP treatment she had always deserved. And Jessica Palmer was being escorted out of the airport by security, carrying only her shattered dignity and the certainty that she had ruined her own career out of pure prejudice. But the story was far from over, because when Margaret Thompson landed at her destination, a surprise awaited her that would prove that some battles for justice echo far beyond a simple commercial flight. 3 weeks later, Margaret Thompson was sitting in the VIP lounge at Chicago Airport, waiting for her flight to receive a national honor from the Emergency Nurses Association. What started as a simple trip to visit her grandson had turned into something much bigger. The video of Jessica Palmer's public humiliation had surpassed 15 million views across all platforms, not just because of the injustice, but because of the epic turnaround that followed. Margaret had become a symbol of dignity in the face of prejudice, and her story inspired real change. "Miss Thompson?" A young woman approached nervously. "My name is Sarah Chun, the airline's new director diversity. May I have a moment?" Margaret smiled warmly. "Of course, dear. Have a seat. I wanted to inform you personally that we have implemented the Margaret Thompson protocol on all our flights," Sarah said proudly. "Any employee who treats passengers in a discriminatory manner will be immediately fired without possibility of appeal." Meanwhile, Jessica Palmer was in her one-bedroom apartment, scrolling through hundreds of negative comments on her social media accounts. She had lost not only her job, but also her flight attendant license. No airline wanted to associate its brand with the Margaret Thompson case. Her friends had distanced themselves, embarrassed by the public shame. Her boyfriend left her after seeing the video for the first time. "I don't recognize the person you become," were his last words before blocking her number. The most painful thing was reading the messages of support for Margaret. Hundreds of people shared their own stories of discrimination, always ending with, "But Mrs. Margaret showed us that dignity always wins in the end." Back at the airport, Margaret received a call from her grandson Marcus, now Dr. Marcus Thompson. "Grandma, did you see the news? The Senate passed a federal law against discrimination in transportation. They're calling it the Margaret Thompson Act." Margaret laughed softly. "Honey, I just wanted to visit my family. I never imagined that a rude flight attendant would change national laws. That's why I admire you so much," Marcus replied emotionally. "You didn't yell. You didn't curse. You didn't stoop to her level. You just maintained your dignity. And that was more powerful than any revenge." The irony was not lost on Margaret. Jessica had tried to humiliate her because she believed she was just another unimportant old black woman. Now Margaret was a respected national figure, while Jessica was an example of what not to do. Captain Marcus Williams, who had witnessed the entire situation, was promoted to Director of East Coast Operations. In his first internal memo, he wrote, "Mrs. Margaret Thompson taught us that heroism is not only about saving lives during emergencies, but about maintaining dignity when others try to diminish us." 6 months later, Margaret received a handwritten letter. It was from Jessica Palmer. "Mrs. Thompson, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I wanted you to know that losing everything made me finally see who I had become. I'm in therapy and volunteering at nursing homes. Your grace in the face of my cruelty has taught me more about character than any punishment could ever have." Margaret folded the letter carefully and put it away. She wouldn't respond right away. Forgiveness took time, but she recognized a soul seeking redemption when she saw one. Margaret's real victory wasn't Jessica's dismissal or the tribute she received. It was proving that when you hold on to your dignity, the whole world notices. Her calm in the face of the storm inspired millions to never accept being diminished by prejudice. A year later, at the same airport where it all began, Margaret noticed a plaque on the wall. Margaret Thompson VIP Lounge, dedicated to those who remind us that dignity is not a privilege. It is a right. Jessica Palmer never worked in aviation again. But Margaret Thompson continued to fly around the world, not only saving lives in emergencies, but saving humanity one act of dignity at a time. The lesson was simple. You can try to humiliate someone because of their color, age, or appearance. But when that person responds with class and dignity, the one who gets humiliated is the one who chose prejudice. Because in the end, the best revenge isn't destroying your enemies. It's becoming so admirable that even they recognize your greatness. Margaret Thompson proved that some battles you win not by fighting, but simply by being who you are, unbeatable in dignity, unshakable in character, and impossible to diminish. If this story resonated with you, share it with someone who needs reminding that their quiet strength matters too. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories like this.